My name is Lena Moreau. I'm 37 years old. And until 5 minutes ago, everyone at the embassy gala thought I was just a waitress. The ballroom shimmered with diplomatic gold. Champagne flutes clinked. Strings played something expensive. Men in tuxedos and uniforms stood like titans beneath the chandelier. I moved through them unnoticed. Just another server in black. Just another silent face behind the linen gloves. Then I heard him, my brother, Ethan Moreau, Ivy League graduate, national security advisor, and darling of every camera within 10 miles of the Pentagon. He was standing near the center of the gala with his usual entourage of polished smiles and influence. He saw me, and like I knew he would, he smiled, that cold, amused smile that's followed me since childhood. Then he leaned toward the group beside him and said loudly, "That's my sister, just a waitress." No threat. The laughter around him wasn't cruel. It was worse. Dismissive. I kept moving. Head lowered. Tray steady. My heart didn't race. It never does anymore. Not after everything. I wasn't there for Ethan. I wasn't even there for me. I was there because a 4-star general's life was in danger. And I was the only one who knew it. General Delacroix was standing at the far end of the ballroom, tall, decorated, and surrounded by aides. His champagne flute had just been filled. I watched it change hands, watched the gloved fingers that poured it, watched the tiny flicker in the server's expression as he stepped back. And then I walked forward. My tray was empty now. My gloves were damp. I passed Ethan without a glance and approached the general. He lifted the glass. It caught the light just right. I leaned in slightly, just enough for my voice to carry, and whispered in perfect French, "Ne bois pas, don't drink that." The room didn't stop, but his eyes did. They locked onto mine. Everything else blurred for a heartbeat. Then came the question, soft, measured in French. "Quest indicate, what's your call sign?" I looked him straight in the eye and answered, "Cipher." He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He simply set the glass down untouched and gave a single nod to the man beside him. Inside my glove, my fingers tightened around the thin tag I wore hidden beneath the dress uniform. A nameplate no one could see, etched with a name no one had spoken aloud in 3 years. Cipher. It took exactly 5 minutes. The ballroom doors burst open. Like a scene from a war film. Armed military police stormed in. Swift, clinical, unmistakable. Guests froze. Forks midair. Conversations died. Then silence gave way to gasps. They didn't come for me. They didn't touch Delacroix. They walked past Ethan and stopped behind his boss, Harold Veit, director of strategic data systems. "Mr. Veit," one officer said coldly, "you're under arrest for espionage and the unauthorized transfer of classified military intelligence." The sound of handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed louder than the quartet playing in the corner. Ethan's face drained of color. This is some kind of mistake," he said. "He's a decorated official. This is a misunderstanding." Jonathan stepped forward, a face Ethan would recognize from glass code from 3 years ago. Except now, he wasn't just a colleague. He was the commanding agent on scene. "No mistake," Jonathan said, eyes not leaving Veit. "We've been listening for 3 years and Cipher just confirmed it." I didn't speak. I didn't look at Ethan. Instead, I took off the comms piece in my ear, set it on the nearest table beside the untouched champagne, and walked out. No one stopped me because in that moment, I was no longer just a waitress. I was the echo of a secret they tried to erase. And they just learned what happens when you dismiss a quiet woman who never stopped listening. 3 years ago, I was part of an elite cyber intelligence unit called Glass Code, a name no one outside the Pentagon was ever meant to hear. We weren't soldiers. We were architects of silence. The kind that didn't wear uniforms. The kind that fought wars through signals, backdoors, and code buried 6 firewalls deep. My title meant little on paper. Just another intelligence analyst. But behind that desk, I was Cipher. Not just a call sign, but a firewall in human form. It started on a rainy Monday, the kind of morning that made secrets feel heavier. I noticed an anomaly in the packet logs, a pattern, an invisible bleed in the system, like someone opening a vein just wide enough to drain a drip of data at a time. At first, I assumed it was noise, but the metadata said otherwise, time-stamped, geo-routed, masked behind layers too. Perfect for any low-level breach. I reported it to our internal security lead. I expected questions, maybe even silence. What I didn't expect was the erasure. Within 48 hours, my system access was restricted. Within 72, I was invited into a polished white room by 3 men in suits I'd never seen. One of them from internal affairs. They told me I had mishandled secure data, that a traceable leak had occurred under my login, that this jeopardized the integrity of an ongoing classified operation. I asked to see the logs. They declined. I asked to file a formal rebuttal. They told me it was unnecessary because this was not an investigation. It was a discharge. Honorable, they said, like it was a kindness. No trial, no defense, just silence. I packed my things in a cardboard box that didn't belong to me. Jonathan, the only one in that room who had once called me a friend, never made eye contact, never said a word. When I reached my car, I found an envelope wedged beneath the windshield. No return address. Inside it, a key, an old one. Brass, faded, and a single slip of paper. You'll need this when it's time to remember. I knew the handwriting. It was my father's. I drove 6 hours north to the last place he ever called home. A cabin near Lake Elysian, abandoned for years. It took time to find the lock hidden behind loose floorboards under the stove. Inside a wooden box, heavy, untouched. I didn't open it right away. I just sat with it, let my fingers run along the grooves. I hadn't heard my father's voice in over a decade. He died in uniform, a quiet man, decorated in secret. We never talked much, but he always knew without asking when I was broken. I opened the box on the third night. Inside, a single cassette tape, analog reel, and a note for Lena, if the world ever forgets who you are. I didn't have a tape player that day, but I knew one thing. This was no accident. This was not sentiment. This was a message he never trusted the world enough to say out loud. In that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just realized something no tribunal, no government, suit, and no brother of mine had ever understood. If they thought they could rewrite my story by deleting the truth, they underestimated the one thing I never forgot how to do: decode silence. And I'd just begun. Jonathan didn't say goodbye the day I left Glasscode. He stood in the corner of the operations room, arms folded, eyes fixed on the terminal screen like it held the meaning of loyalty. Jonathan and I had been partners for 5 years, decoding patterns no one else could see. He was brilliant with systems, a quiet genius, but in that moment he said nothing. That silence cut deeper than any accusation the suits and internal affairs had thrown at me. I remember looking back once before the elevator doors closed. I waited for him to nod, to offer a hint that he believed me. He didn't. His face was blank, but I caught the smallest shift in his jaw, like he wanted to speak, but swallowed the words instead. For months after, I replayed that image in my mind, wondering if Jonathan had doubted me or if fear had chained his voice. Maybe both. Then there's Ethan, my older brother. If Jonathan's silence was painful, Ethan's voice was a weapon. He's the golden child of the Moreau family. A Georgetown graduate with a degree in international relations, a polished resume, and a career that screams success. Ethan believes in visible victories, promotions, medals, applause. He's always believed that what I do or did was less than that. To him, my service in Glasscode was just another odd job. He never knew the details. He never cared enough to ask. Lena, you should have gone to college like everyone else. He told me once after our mother's funeral. Instead, You've been wasting your time with whatever it is you do. He didn't know I had been Cipher, the shadow behind. Countless cyber operations that prevented bombs from going off, networks from collapsing, and secrets from being stolen by foreign agents. I saved lives from a screen. But in Ethan's eyes, I was still just his little sister without a degree. Ethan thrives in places like embassy galas, where the air smells of expensive cologne and whispered power deals. I avoid them like the plague. But standing there that night in Brussels, disguised as a waitress with a champagne tray, I felt a strange calm. Ethan's mocking words, just a waitress, only fueled the fire I had been carrying for years. I keep a single reminder of who I truly am. My Cipher tag. It's a small metal nameplate, no bigger than a dog tag, but etched deep with that single word, Cipher, in letters so fine they almost vanish under light. It was given to me by my unit commander the day we dismantled the biggest threat glass code had ever faced. This is not for your neck, he'd said. This is for your heart. Keep it close. I've carried it in the inner pocket of my jacket ever since. Even when I was dismissed, even when I felt like nothing more than a discarded piece of old tech, I kept that tag near my chest. Some nights I'd press my thumb over the letters until I could feel the grooves. It reminded me I had once been someone. Jonathan's silence after my departure became a shadow that followed me everywhere. Months after my discharge, I received a single encrypted email from an anonymous account. The message was just 5 words. Trust no one, not even me. I knew. It was from Jonathan. His fingerprint was in the phrasing, the clipped tone, the precise spacing. He was warning me, but also confessing his own fear. Whatever I had uncovered in those data leaks, it wasn't just a glitch. It was something bigger, something he was too afraid to confront. Ethan, meanwhile, grew louder in his disdain. Every family gathering turned into a subtle interrogation. Still serving drinks, or have you found a real job? He'd laugh like it was a harmless joke, but I knew better. He needed to feel superior because he didn't understand me. Maybe he didn't want to. The gala wasn't the first time Ethan underestimated me, but it was the first time he saw my true face. Not the unformed cipher of glass code, but the woman who carried both betrayal and clarity inside her. That night, as I slipped my fingers over the cipher tag beneath my blouse, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't just survive their silence and judgment. I would rise from it. I would make sure they understood that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quietest person in the room who changes everything. 3 years. That's how long the box sat untouched, buried beneath the floorboards of my father's cabin. Its brass edges dulled by time, its weight quietly growing heavier in my memory. I brought it home the day I left glass code, a silent companion to my exile. I didn't open it then. I wasn't ready. But that changed after Brussels. That night, after the arrest, after I walked away from a room that had finally seen me, I returned home. And the silence in my apartment felt different. Not oppressive like before, but expectant, like something was waiting. I pulled the box from the back of my closet, dust clinging to its edges like old regrets. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what might finally be revealed. I sat on the floor and opened it. Inside, the cassette, still intact. Still labeled in my father's handwriting. For Lena, if the world forgets you. Beside it, a photo, black and white faded. My father in uniform, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. Tall, narrow shoulders. Wearing a suit instead of fatigues. Both were smiling, but neither looked happy. I retrieved the tape player I had found years earlier at a flea market in New Jersey. A vintage relic bought without purpose at the time. Maybe some part of me always knew this day would come. I slid the tape in, pressed play. There was static at first, soft, crackling, intimate. Then came his voice. Lena, if you're hearing this, I'm gone. I never had the chance to tell you everything. Partly because I didn't trust the world to listen. Mostly because I didn't want to see you hurt the way I was. I didn't breathe. I just listened. I know they pushed you out. I know it wasn't your fault. The same thing happened to me years ago. They erased me too. Not because I failed, but because I found something I wasn't supposed to see. My throat tightened. Cipher wasn't born to retaliate. She was born to decode. Your job isn't to destroy the people who silenced you. It's to reveal the truths they buried. The tape hissed again, like his voice had to fight through time to reach me. In my final months, I traced something. A channel encrypted. They were bleeding data to someone buried inside our own walls. I traced it to Vit's division, but I couldn't prove it. My heart stopped. Vit, Ethan's boss, the man who'd been let out in handcuffs at the embassy gala. There's a second file. I left it hidden. You'll find the key under the picture in this box. It's not finished. I couldn't finish it, but you can. I lifted the photo. Behind it, taped to the wooden panel, was a micro SD card sealed in foil. I held it up to the light. The label had one word: ashes. You'll know what to do with it, but don't do it alone. Jonathan may have gone silent, but he knows the architecture. You'll need him. There was a long pause, the kind that made me wonder if the tape had ended. Then softly, I always knew you'd be better than me, Lena. Not louder, better. Click. The tape stopped. The reel spun a moment longer and went quiet. I sat there on the floor for a long time. For years, I thought my father died without knowing who I became, without understanding the damage that was done to me. But he knew. He saw what was coming. And he left a trail. One that led directly back into the shadows I'd been forced out of. I inserted the micro SD card into my secure terminal. The screen blinked to life. A single folder. Timestamped 15 years ago, encrypted with glass codes. I recognized it instantly. Inside, packet logs, email fragments, chat transcripts. Some were incomplete. Some were corrupted, but enough remained to tell a story. One that began long before I joined Glasscode. One that named names, dates, IP trails, an entire ecosystem of silence, and buried within the logs, a single audio file. I played it. It was Vit's voice, unmistakable. She's not a threat. She's just a support asset. Let her take the fall. No one will believe her without a title. That was the day they decided I would be erased. And that was the moment I decided I'd never be silent again. The audio file from the micro SD card wasn't complete. It started clean. Fight's voice crisp and arrogant. Exactly as I remembered him. I listened to it twice, then 3 times. By the 4th replay, I noticed something, a gap. It wasn't a silence, not the kind that comes from someone pausing to think. It was a compression. Artifact, a manipulated pause. Too perfect, too clean. Exactly 2.4 seconds. Of static, like a surgical cut in a conversation that should have flowed naturally. Someone had edited the recording. I sat back in my chair staring at the waveform. My father hadn't done this. He wouldn't have sent me a mutilated file. That meant someone else, either during the transfer or after his death. And whoever it was, they didn't want me to hear what came next. That kind of edit requires precision, access, motive, and an arrogance that assumes the erased won't come looking. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. But I was determined. There's a man, off-grid, untraceable, who owed me a life. He calls himself Hyan. Real name's a ghost. Doesn't matter. We crossed paths in Marrakesh 7 years ago. I pulled him out of a compromised data tunnel seconds before a drone strike flattened the alley he was in. He never forgot. People like him don't. I reached out the only way we used to contact each other, via a dead server behind a defunct NGO website with a hidden port buried in the DNS logs. I uploaded the audio clip and left a message. Static where truth once lived. I need a voice restored. Cipher. He responded in 22 minutes. Didn't think I'd hear from you again. Still saving the world with syntax. Give me a day. I smiled for the first time in weeks. While Hyan worked, I stared out my window. Below, traffic moved like veins in the city. Silent, constant, purposeful. I kept running my fingers over the Cipher tag, the cold metal grounding me. My father once told me, when the truth is erased, the only thing that remains is who dares to remember. That phrase had haunted me for years, but now it felt like a code, like a reminder of what he knew and what he believed I was capable of doing. 24 hours later, I received a single audio file and a decrypted message. You were right. It was masked at layer 3, embedded in the ultrasonic frequency range, hidden like a ghost. I pulled what I could. Warning, it's messy. I played the file. The same recording, this time uninterrupted. The missing 2.4 seconds were back. It was a voice I hadn't expected. Ethan, she's not a threat. She's just a support asset. Let her take the fall. No one will believe her without a title. Then Ethan's voice, clear as day. We bury her quietly or the whole operation is compromised. Fight. Replied. Agreed. She doesn't know enough to be dangerous, but too much to be kept. My lungs tightened. Ethan had known. He hadn't just mocked me out of ignorance. He had been in on it. He had stood beside the men who erased me and said nothing. Worse, he had helped them write the script. My own brother. The same one who'd laughed at me across family dinners. Who'd toasted champagne at embassy galas while I disappeared into obscurity? Who'd shaken hands with Fight as if his integrity was inherited and invincible. All a mask. I listened. Again, then again. I wanted the words to lose power, but they didn't. Each time I heard them, they carved something new into me. Not rage, not revenge, something colder, sharper, clarity. This wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about exposure, about truth. And I wasn't going to scream it from rooftops. I was going to whisper it exactly where it would echo the loudest. Where reputations wore suits and lies wore medals. But first, I needed to finish the puzzle. And for that, I needed the one man who'd once looked away. Jonathan. The phone rang just past midnight. Not my personal line. The other one. The one I hadn't used since I walked away from the Cipher grid. It was an encrypted signal, military grade, the kind that didn't leave a trace, the kind that only rang if someone with serious clearance wanted to be heard. I stared at it for 3 seconds before I answered. Lena Moreau. The voice on the other end wasn't familiar, but it was calm, precise. American accent, East Coast. Measured like he'd been trained to make you trust him just long enough to forget he never gave his name. We've been watching the signal reconstruction you performed. The recovery from the masked Layer 3 segment. Impressive. That set off alarms in my head. The only person I'd shared that with was Hyan, and he was a ghost. Who is this code? Name? Grey Root. I speak on behalf of a secured joint oversight council between the DoD and 2 former members of GLASS. Code's independent tribunal. That got my full attention. Grayett continued, we believe the files you decrypted are part of a larger data bleed tied to a classified sequence, long dormant, now reactivated through a node code named Opal Verge. We also believe General Veidt is not acting alone. I said nothing. He didn't need encouragement. He already had my attention. We need eyes on a location. Brussels. You'll be under non-official cover. Civilian status. Staff tier. You'll be provided a sealed brief through Channel Prism. I exhaled slowly. The embassy. What's the cover? I asked. There was the faintest pause. You'll be attending as hospitality support for the embassy's military appreciation gala. Black tie. Full surveillance clearance. You will not engage unless triggered. Of course, a ghost dressed as a waitress. I almost laughed. I hadn't worn a uniform in 3 years. Now I'd be wearing one that served drinks. What's the trigger? Another pause. A toast. If Delquad drinks from the glass V offers him, stand down. If not, Cipher protocol resumes. Audio. Confirmation must be recorded. And Ethan, he's still a wild card, but he's attached to Fight's retinue. If he exposes you, we pull the cord. I nodded. Even though he couldn't see me. You don't need to answer now, but if you accept, go to Gate D at Union Station. Tomorrow by 6 a.m. There'll be a man with a copy of Lewis in his left hand. Say, we don't catch what we don't name. He'll handle the rest. Click. The line went dead. I sat in the dark, let the silence stretch around me. This wasn't just a mission. It was a trapdoor into everything I'd tried to seal shut. Veet. Ethan Dekwa. This wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. This was systemic rot. And someone out there finally wanted to shine a light on it or use me as the match. I opened my drawer, took out the black utility belt, slid the Cipher tag into the fabric close to my chest. It felt like it never left. I picked up my burner and texted one word to the number Hyan had used. Gray root. 2 minutes. Later, he replied, if they're reaching out, they're desperate. Be sharper than they expect. I didn't sleep that night. But when dawn came, I was at Union Station, and I was ready. The apartment was silent, except for the quiet clicks of gear being tested. I laid everything out on the table the way I had in the past. Only this time, the mission wasn't sanctioned. Not officially. First, the micro-directional earpiece. Small enough to hide beneath my hairline, sensitive enough to pick up whispers across a ballroom. I calibrated it to channel Delta 4 secure. Then came the pinhole camera, sewn just beneath the collar of my gala uniform, disguised as a standard button. The feed would route through a bouncing relay. Hyan helped me set up, piggybacking off a catering company's cloud system, cloaked in plain sight. I slipped the watch onto my wrist. It looked ordinary, minimalist, cheap. But behind its analog face was a vibration sensor keyed to my own heartbeat. If anything went wrong, 3 firm taps would trigger the fallback code. Last was the name tag, just a brushed silver plate blink. I stared at it, picked up the engraving stylus. For the 3rd time in my life, I etched the same 6 letters. CIPHER, 1 stroke at a time. The way my grandmother taught me to write when my hands were too small to hold a pencil. Steady. The metal hissed as I carved a tiny rebellion written in chrome. This wasn't just a code name. It was a signature, a history, a promise. As I blew the metal dust from the plate, my fingers stilled. A memory drifted in, soft and vivid. I was 6, curled in my grandmother's sunroom on a wool blanket, while the rest of the house buzzed with guests. I hadn't spoken a full sentence in over a year. The specialist called it selective mutism. My mother called it stubbornness, but my grandmother understood silence. She placed an old leather-bound French dictionary in my lap. No pictures, just words. Is one, she whispered. You don't need to speak to understand. We spent hours with that book. She'd point to a word, say it softly, and wait. When I finally mimicked her, just once, she didn't cheer or cry. She smiled as if I'd just done something holy. Language became my window, not a tool for conversation, a key for decoding the world. I learned French before English, not through classrooms or textbooks, but through the patience of a woman who spoke softly enough for me to feel safe and sound. Years later, when the Cipher program evaluated candidates for linguistic acuity, I passed in 26 dialects. But that first one, the French my grandmother taught me, it was the one I trusted when the world felt wrong, and it was the one I'd use now. Back in the present, I finished packing the gear into a black case. Each piece had a slot, a purpose. Before I zipped it shut, I looked at the name tag one last time. Ran my thumb across the letters, the edges still sharp. I pinned it to the left side of my uniform, the side closest to the heart. It looked like any ordinary staff ID, but it wasn't. It was a warning. One last check. Hair tied back. Shoes flat and silent. Jacket crease sharp, facial expression neutral. No one at that gala would remember me. That was the point. I was meant to be invisible, unimportant, unarmed. But what they didn't realize was that invisibility was its own kind of armor. And silence, that had always been my deadliest weapon. I slid the case shut, checked the clock. 19:05. Final call for the catering team was 20x sharp. By morning, someone in that room would regret ever handing my brother a microphone, and I wouldn't need to raise my voice, just a glass. The marble floors glistened under chandeliers that had seen more betrayals than ballots. The room smelled of citrus polish, vintage brandy, and diplomatic tension. I entered through the staff corridor, a nameless silhouette in black. My uniform was pressed, but forgettable, my tray steady, my posture trained. No one looked twice. That was the plan until Ethan. He stood near the east alcove, a dark suit, metal pinned, hand resting on a bourbon glass like he owned the air around him. 3 years since we shared a room, and not once since had he tried to speak to me, not after my discharge, not after the inquiry, not even after our father's funeral. He laughed at something the man beside him said, tipping his head back just enough to catch sight of me. I saw the pause, the calculation behind his eyes. Then it came. Lena. I turned slowly, professionally, met his gaze without breaking rhythm. His voice lifted an octave, enough for nearby guests to hear. My sister, I didn't know they let glass code operatives into catering. The man beside him chuckled, unsure. Ethan took a step closer, squinting with mock curiosity. No, wait. That's right. You're not one anymore, are you? Just a waitress now. He let the words hang in the air like perfume. I didn't flinch. I trained for this moment more than any field op. Would you care for champagne, sir? I asked. His smirk widened. Still, with the manners. What a waste. I moved the tray slightly toward the other guests, avoided his glass. Intentional. Not drinking tonight? He asked. Scared you'll spill classified secrets into the punch bowl. Laughter. Polite. Confused. The kind of laugh people give when they know they're supposed to, but aren't sure why. I bowed my head just enough to remain in character. Not enough to break. Enjoy your evening. And I turned. As I walked away, the pulse in my wrist buzzed once, then twice. Channel Delta 4. Secure. Live. Hyan's voice barely audible in my earpiece. You good? I pressed the side of my finger against the casing. A silent affirmative. But inside, the flashbacks came like shards. The hearing room, the tribunal's verdict, Ethan refusing to look me in the eye as he signed the papers. Our mother crying into a folded flag. And me watching it all with a stillness they mistook for apathy. I wasn't broken. Then, just observant. And now I had a front row seat to the theater he helped stage. I moved through the room. Tray balanced, gaze sharp. I memorized positions, exits, guard rotations, security patterns. Fight was laughing. Near the stage. Deliqua 10 paces left already with a half-full glass. Ethan drifted toward them, still smiling, still blind. I slipped behind the curtain leading to the rear service hallway. Checked the feed. All green, but my hand paused over the name tag. Just for a second. He called me a waitress, as if I'd been demoted, as if service was shameful. But he never knew what it meant to serve in silence, to protect without recognition, to bleed without a medal. Let him laugh. Let him bask. Because in 5 minutes, the room would stop laughing. And he'd finally see who I really was. Not the sister who followed orders. Not the soldier who took the fall, but the cipher he never saw coming. They always said data leaves footprints. So do thieves, but only if you're trained to notice the floor they walk on. While the orchestra drifted into Strauss and champagne laughter clinked in the background, I moved quietly through the side corridors of the gala. The lighting was warm, polished, perfect for misdirection, and someone had gone to great lengths to cover theirs. I noticed at first with the tray a subtle label shift. The caterer logo stamped beneath the glass rim didn't match the batch we were assigned. The decanter had a fog line, just slightly lower than regulation fill. One of the bottles had been resealed poorly. Someone had swapped it. But that wasn't all. Veet Ethan's superior was speaking with Deliqua again. Not unusual, but the men flanking them were supposedly civilian data consultants embedded for international network alignment. That's what the guest List claimed. I recognized two immediately. The third made me stop moving. He was tall, blonde, looked like someone you'd trust to guard your phone. He wore a cobalt tie, smooth, unbothered, but I knew him. Years ago. During my first year at Glass Code, I'd been assigned to track metadata exfiltration across 3 compromised NATO nodes. That man, the one now laughing near the general, had been quietly escorted out of the Berlin tech cell for internal misalignment, which was code for caught siphoning subroutines. They buried the scandal. No formal charges, just relocation. And yet here, he was fully credentialed, holding a secure USB like it was a thumb drive, full of cocktail photos. That was when my pulse changed. I tilted my tray ever so slightly. My collar mic buzzed with a quick ping. Hyan noticed it too. You see that? He whispered. Cobalt tie. Confirmed. I said under breath. I hovered briefly by a mirrored column, allowing the surface to reflect. Delocroix's group. That's when I caught it. V pulled a small black case from his inner jacket, handed it to the cobalt-tied man who exchanged it with an identical one. I blinked twice. It was a classic swap. Old-school physical data handoff designed to trick basic surveillance. 2 drives, exact casing. One filled with garbage logs, the other holding raw decrypted Cipher key sets. My stomach clenched. If those keys matched what I thought they did, they weren't just playing politics. They were dismantling systems, blindfolding allies one protocol at a time. I took 3 steps forward. Fight turned, met my eyes. For a moment, I wondered if he saw past the apron and tray, but he didn't. He nodded dismissively and turned back. That arrogance, it would cost him more than his clearance. I veered toward the sidebar, resting the tray down while adjusting my ear feed. Gray root, I whispered. Receiving a crisp voice. Replied, USBAP confirmed. Repeat, visual ID on Cobalt, former Berlin tech cell. Probable payload in transit. Proceed as planned. I exhaled slowly. I didn't need to break cover yet, but it wouldn't be long. Back in the ballroom, Delra raised his glass again, surrounded by men smiling too wide and speaking too little. Ethan now stood beside Veet, clearly basking in proximity to power. He looked proud, but pride is louder than evidence, and evidence was what I held in my silence. I moved into position. The lights dimmed slightly as a pianist began the next piece. Something in B minor, haunting. As I passed a mirrored tray to another guest, I caught my reflection, still the waitress. But behind the collar near my heart, the Cipher tag burned cold against my skin. Let them underestimate me. That was part of the trap. Delocroix lifted the glass, not casually, ceremonially. His movements were precise, as if each gesture was rehearsed and timed to an unseen clock only he and history could read. The room quieted a beat as his fingers curled around the crystal stem, the liquid inside catching a glint of chandelier light. He was about to drink. I stepped forward. My shoes didn't echo. My tray no longer carried glasses. My apron was neat, my badge untouched. But my pulse controlled one deep breath, one memory of the moment I stopped being silent. He didn't see me coming. Most men like him never do. I stood beside him close enough for his security detail to glance, but not close enough to trigger protocol. I bowed slightly as a server would. And I whispered, Nibu pa don't drink. Time slowed. He didn't turn fully, just froze. There was a flash in his eyes. Not panic, not yet, but recognition. A single syllable in the right tongue can trigger memories no code ever will. Question indicative, he said under his breath. What's your call sign? I answered without hesitation. Cipher. He stared at me, truly looked for the first time. His gaze sliced through the disguise, the apron, the facade of servitude. The commander returned in him. Years of war and betrayal of betrayals etched in the lines beneath his eyes. And then the shift. He placed the glass down, not abruptly, not with fear, but with deliberation, as if the crystal itself had turned radioactive. I stood still. One of his aides moved, ready to question. Delacroix raised a hand. The aide froze. The music faded into background blur. Distant laughter became muffled. He leaned in, barely tilting his head. His French was flawless, cold, familiar. Since when have you been dormant? Glass code. Since glass code, a beat passed. He straightened his lapel, lifted his chin. Vet, you're late. Vet, you're in danger. Another breath. Another quiet command from his eyes. One of the men beside him nodded and disappeared into the crowd. Delacroix turned ever so slightly, blocking the visual line from Ethan. Invite. Who else knows? He asked. This time in English. Enough, I replied. He looked toward the stage, then back at the drink. They compromised the diplomatic network, I nodded. The payloads, already inside, swapped through USB relays. Someone's about to trigger it. I don't know if you're the target or the distraction. He studied me, weighing silence like it was ordnance. Then I thought Cipher was a ghost file. We usually are, I said. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a flick of his hand. His team shifted formation. One whispered into a cuff. The other scanned the exits. I knew what that meant. The gala was about to become a trap. Just not for me. Will they recognize you? He asked. Not until it's too late, he nodded once, almost respectfully. You were always better than they gave you credit for. That stopped me for a second. Not because of the compliment, but because of who hadn't said it, who never would. Ethan was still laughing near the West Bar, holding court like a man who believed no secrets could ever outrun his smile. But the truth was already circling, and the glass he hadn't seen raised would never be drunk. I turned to leave. Delacroix's voice followed like a shadow. Cipher. Yes, sir. Don't disappear again. I paused. Only if they stopped pretending I never existed. And I walked back into the crowd, invisible, observed, ready. The moment the final syllable left Delacroix's lips, I felt it. The air shift like pressure dropping before a thunderstorm. It started with a single crackle in my ear. A calm line I hadn't activated. Then heavy boots, steel-toed, marching with purpose. The ballroom doors slammed open, gasps followed. Military police full gear. Emblems gleaming. Each step rang louder than the music. Now cut mid-beat. Every guest froze. Conversations collapsed mid-sentence. Wine glasses tilted. Stopped. At the center of the phalanx, Jonathan. I hadn't seen him since the day I walked out of glass code with nothing but a cardboard box and bruised trust. He was older now, leaner. Sharper, but the eyes, those were the same, still burning under silence. He scanned the room like he'd memorized every angle. Then he saw me. One beat. Two, no words. He simply brought 2 fingers to his earpiece and said clearly, confirm. Cipher. Authenticated. That one sentence detonated the quiet. The MP split into formation and made a beeline straight for Veet. Ethan blinked, confused, still unaware the hunter was already in the cage. What the hell is this? He shouted. Veet, halfway through a joke, didn't even finish the punchline before 2 officers grabbed his arms. You're under arrest for espionage, unauthorized extraction of classified data, and breach of international protocol. Gasps again. Phones came out. Flashlights flickered. There is a mistake. Veet stammered. I have clearance. Not anymore, Jonathan replied. You were flagged 3 hours ago. By who? Jonathan didn't even blink. Cipher Fight looked at me. Really looked for the first time. Then realization cracked across his face like glass under pressure. No, she's just Ethan cut in. Livid, she's my sister. She's not even military anymore. Jonathan's eyes flicked to Ethan, voice flat. Sir, please step back. This is an active investigation. But Ethan stepped forward, his voice louder now. Lena, what did you do? Are you what is happening? The whole room watched now. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Veet was being cuffed. Read his rights. A diplomatic attaché stood slack-jawed, unable to form a sentence. Jonathan looked at me once more, gave the smallest nod, not of command, but of recognition, then turned away, directing the extraction. Ethan turned to me again, his face pale, trembling with something between fury and disbelief. "Lena, what is this?" I met his eyes. All those years of being dismissed, mocked, erased, labeled just a waitress or just emotional or just a woman. Now I said nothing, just met his stare and gave him a single deliberate nod. No gloating, no smirk, just truth. He stumbled backward slightly. "Cipher," he whispered, like tasting a word he'd never learned to spell. But by then the moment had moved past him. The real game was already over. The extraction team disappeared into the hallway with Vite. The guest began whispering again. The music resumed half-heartedly as though unsure it should. I walked toward the table where my earpiece had been, placed it down, turned, and left the ballroom. Not in retreat, but in return. The embassy gala had ended hours ago, but I was still sitting alone in the dim back room of the consulate. The last glass had been cleared. The chandeliers above faded to a soft hum. I had taken off the uniform. I wasn't a waitress anymore. I never really was. A soft knock on the door. "Lena," a voice said. I knew that voice. I hadn't heard it in years, but it hadn't changed. "Jonathan." He stepped inside, no longer the fresh-faced analyst I remembered. His uniform bore the stripes of command now. He looked older, wearier, but the way he avoided my eyes said something deeper. "I owe you something," he said, holding out a flash drive. I took it, not yet trusting it was what I thought. "It's the full audio," he said. "The original recording, uncut, unaltered, the one you never got to hear." My hands tightened around the plastic. "You had this?" I had access to it, but I didn't speak up. Not 3 years ago. He swallowed hard. I was up for promotion. I kept quiet. There it was. Not just betrayal, cowardice, dressed in ambition. "Why no?" I asked flatly. Jonathan looked down. "I saw you tonight. Saw who you still are and who I let them erase. You didn't deserve what happened to you." I didn't answer. I plugged in the drive to my secured laptop. The recording loaded. Familiar static filling the room, followed by my father's voice, his deep, deliberate tone. "If you're hearing this, it means they've buried me," he began. "I left a trail, Lena, when I wasn't supposed to. Glass code wasn't just an operation. It was a cover. Someone on the inside was trading classified intel for foreign immunity. But I couldn't name names. Not without proof." The tape clicked. There was a pause. Then it resumed. "You must find the buyer. The one I feared most is someone Ethan trusted. He went by the name Marlin in the files. But you know him. He was at our dinner table for years. Your brother's best friend." My chest tightened. There was only one man Ethan had ever called his brother in arms. Colonel Derek Voss. He used to sit next to me at family barbecues, ruffling my hair and calling me silent genius. I remembered his laugh, the way he always brought Ethan cigars from overseas. I remembered how he vanished after my father died. No calls, no letters. Jonathan watched me as I processed. "That's why I came," he said. "You weren't crazy. You weren't careless. You were right. And I helped them silence you." I closed the laptop. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked again. "Guilt doesn't bring back 3 years." He shook his head. "No, but maybe it can help you finish what your father started." A long silence settled between us. "Do you know where Voss is?" I finally asked. Jonathan nodded. "He's been stationed out of Stuttgart, but rumor is he's been meeting with Delocqua before every security briefing. Off the record, no logs." I stared into the darkness. Then, the gala was just the beginning. Jonathan reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "There's more. Flight logs, hotel receipts, conversations traced through burner phones, enough to start a chain." I took it without a word. My hands were steady. Lena, he said gently. You still have time to walk away from this. No one would blame you. I would, I said. He gave a sad smile. I figured you'd say that. As he turned to leave, I stopped him. Why did you really bring this? He looked back. Because the first lesson you ever taught me was that silence helps no one, and I've been silent too long. He walked out, the door clicking softly behind him. I sat for a long time. Then I slid the drive into a hidden pocket in my bag, picked up my phone, dialed a number from memory. Gray route, I said when the line picked up. We're not done. And I meant it. I stood in my small apartment, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The final audio file was ready, unedited, complete. My father's voice preserved across time and betrayal. I had waited 3 years for this, or perhaps all my life. Jonathan had delivered the recording to me without ceremony, his guilt hanging in the air like stale smoke. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He knew better. I didn't offer it either. Not yet. Instead, I uploaded the file to a secure, open-access military transparency portal, something my father once fought to create. One click, and everything he risked his life to say would be heard not just by analysts or brass, but by the very people the system claimed to protect. As the progress bar inched toward completion, I whispered quietly to myself, this isn't about revenge. This is the truth reclaiming oxygen. It went live within 3 minutes. By dawn, the fire had spread. News channels lit up with segments titled Whistleblower's Final Message, Cipher Returns, and Code of Honor. In the Capitol, a special subcommittee was formed. The Senate Intelligence Committee called for an emergency hearing. The brass scrambled. I wasn't invited to the hearing, but that was fine. I wasn't meant to be on the stage. I was the echo. Instead, I watched from a small cafe near the reflecting pool. The screen above the bar switched to live coverage from Capitol Hill. The gavel fell, the hall silenced, and then I heard him. My father's voice, deep, calm, and deliberate. If you're hearing this, I am no longer alive. That's not tragedy, that's timing. My name is Colonel Raymond Morrow. I served under Glass Code and Blue Vial. Cipher was my project, yes, but she was also my daughter. Her name is Lena. To those who discredited her, who buried what she found, who profited while we looked away, this is my final debrief. The room grew quieter as his voice filled every crevice. He spoke of systemic failures, of untracked data handoffs, of personnel killed to hide file leaks, leaks traced back to one man, Gregory Sloan. A name I hadn't heard in years, but I knew it well. Sloan was Ethan's closest friend in college. They enlisted together, rose together, and from the voice logs my father included, it was clear. Ethan may not have orchestrated it, but he knew. My hand trembled around the porcelain cup. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I simply sat and listened as my father gave me back my name. Cipher was never designed for vengeance. She was built for precision to find, isolate, and decode what others call chaos. If she's hearing this, Lena, remember your Cipher, not for applause, but so the wrong does not repeat. That final line landed like a hammer wrapped in velvet. I closed my eyes and memorized its weight. The camera inside the Capitol shifted. There it was, my small contribution. The only physical object I had mailed in that morning, a silver tag, scuffed and old, but clean. It sat on the hearing table beside a glass of water, Cipher etched into it. No last name, no rank, no unit, just a designation once erased, now visible under the harsh lights of accountability. The hearing went into closed session after 23 minutes. That's all it took. The next day, Sloan resigned. V was charged with 4 counts of espionage. Ethan vanished from the media, but not from my memory. I walked to the reflecting pool that evening alone. No medals, no marching band, just me and the truth I'd carried. A small child walked past me, holding her mother's hand. She paused, pointed to my name badge, still clipped to my coat. Cipher, she read. Is that your name? I smiled. No, it's what I became. And I let the silence answer the rest. 3 days after the hearing, I found a package resting on my doorstep. No return address, no stamps, just my name. Handwritten in Ethan's unmistakable script. I didn't rush to open it. I let it sit on my kitchen table as I made tea, swept the floor, and watched the sky change color through the window. The weight of that box wasn't just physical. It pressed on the air. When I finally opened it, I recognized the scent before. I saw the contents. Aged paper, worn leather, a trace of the cologne Ethan always stole from our father. Inside lay an old French dictionary. Its spine was cracked, the pages soft and yellowed. I hadn't seen it in decades. This was the very same book my grandmother used to teach me to speak when I was mute as a child. When words refused to come from my lips, this book was how I survived, how I translated the world. Word by word, page by page. Taped to the inside cover was a note, just a few lines. Written in French. I didn't listen, but now I read. There was no signature, but he didn't need one. Ethan never apologized the way others did. No begging, no breakdowns. Just simple, clean gestures, ones you had to choose to interpret. This was his way of saying I knew and I chose wrong. And maybe now he chose differently. I sat with the book for a long time, my fingers tracing the underlined words, entries circled in pencil from years ago. Trays, betrayal. Familite, truth. I remembered the night I stopped speaking. The night I overheard our father say to my mother, Lena's not broken. She's just busy decoding. It wasn't pity. It was faith. He believed I was more than my silence. I closed the dictionary gently and placed it beside the wooden box that once held his final recording. The two objects now sat together on my bookshelf. One taught me how to understand. The other reminded me what understanding costs. I didn't cry. There was nothing to mourn. Only space to breathe. Some people wait for a clean ending, a parade, a courtroom victory. But I've learned those are just illusions. Real closure doesn't come with a final word. It arrives in the quiet, in the choice not to reopen a wound. Ethan's letter, if that's what it was not a plea to reconnect. It was a mirror. One that simply asked, do you see me now? And my answer, held in silence, was yes. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Sometimes the most powerful reply is to keep decoding. It was snowing gently. I sat alone on the old park bench, the same one where my father used to take me after my speech. Therapy appointments. Back when I barely spoke, back when silence was safer than misinterpretation. I reached into my coat and pulled out the same wooden box. The same one I carried with me through war zones and courtrooms, through betrayals and rebirths. I opened it slowly, fingers brushing past the ribbon-tied cassette, the one that once felt like a wound. Now, it felt like a pulse. I slid on the old earpiece. The wind bit into my cheeks, but the voice in my ear was warm. Conla Cipher, my name, my real name, not Lena. Not just a waitress, not the sister who failed. Cipher, the one who decodes. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because I'd finally run out of things to prove. I didn't need to win anymore. I'd already won quietly, thoroughly, on my own terms. For the first time in years, I smiled, not because I was vindicated, but because the truth had finally arrived without needing to shout, and it was enough. The camera slowly pulled back. I became smaller in the frame, just a woman in a coat, in the snow, with a story that most people would never know, but someone would. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.